in capitalism. And actually, Hassan said this when he was on a podcast with Ethan Klein. He said that, our solution to that is they're going to need re-education. A re-education camp, Hassan? Really? A re-education camp? Fascinating. Unfortunately, not really. Sorry, commies. I get a W here, because wealth transfers are actually very capitalistic. Shut the fuck up. I'm not taking shit from any commies ever again. Fuck communism. Okay, so here is the big conundrum that Marx identifies within his book, The Communist Manifesto. To you basically need to gut your entire house in order to make it work. Hey, this is a clip from my live stream on Twitch. Go check it out and join my Discord server below, please. Thank you so much. Gay commies are trying to take over America, okay? And us libcucks, gotta protect America from the sissy commies, okay? We're gonna destroy them. And this is how. We're talking about why communism sucks in comparison to every other economic mode of production. And not only that, not only does it just normally suck, it sucks on paper too. Okay? Everybody says, oh, it works out in theory, guys. It works out. No, it doesn't. It's so bad that it even fails on paper. Okay? Let's go. First slide. So, who is Jean-Jacques Rousseau? Many of you guys know him from, you might have been forced to read a book called The Social Contract for your government class. Or perhaps you just got curious about the Enlightenment and were like, yo, who's this guy? Who's this guy? Well, actually, I have one of his books. Let me go grab it. Here are his two books. This one is The Social Contract, okay? And he says that we all have social contracts and we're endowed to each other. We all have certain moral duties. And when you enter into a society, when you escape nature, you fundamentally have to follow a social contract to some degree. Okay, in this book, A Discourse on Inequality, a fascinating book where he blames the fact that everybody is unequal, like the fact that everybody is unequal to explain wealth inequality and stuff like that. And it's about how people gain an unnatural advantage over others because of the things that they're born with. And his kind of solution is like, oh, everybody should be treated equal, like super equal. In fact. And that's like his basis for being like a liberal. Why do I call him a socialistic liberal? Because, well, he kind of is Marx's greatest influence. So next slide. Karl Marx, our glorious king. You know him. He kind of sucks. He's actually one of the worst people who's ever graced the face of the earth. Unfortunately, his impact has been so unbridled that he's basically killed like 100 million people, 300 million, whatever the number is. He's killed hundreds of millions of people. He's the father of modern communism. And you may know of him because he wrote a book called The Communist Manifesto, another fascinating read. And the summary of it is abolish all private property. Okay, and we'll get into what communism actually is, which we're starting to right now. But he lived a life of poverty and despair. His kids starved, basically. He had to borrow... He had to borrow money from Engels, which is the other author, Frederick Engels, I believe his name is. He's the other author of the Communist Manifesto. He had to keep on borrowing money in order to survive, basically. He was just like a leech off of everybody in his life. And then he eventually died. He has a beautiful tombstone because he's just like so remembered. Yeah, but of course he's the primary influence for communism. Duh. Okay. So here is the big conundrum that Marx identifies within his book, The Communist Manifesto. The bourgeois versus the proletariat. The bourgeois are the owners of the means of production, and the proletariat are those who give up labor in exchange for resources. So the proletariat works on behalf of the bourgeoisie. Okay? So owning the means of production or effectively owning the factories or owning a house, that counts because that's a means of production, actually, if you really want to think about it. And that's why Marx says abolish all private property. Okay? What he calls for is a revolt, basically. He says that the proletariat should seize the means of production from the bourgeoisie and everyone should collectively own everything. Okay? And then everybody works in this like homogenous system. Not only is this kind of like a utopian view of human nature, but it also kind of fails on multiple fronts, which we're going to get into. Now, unfortunately, these ideas have been so prevalent and so popular throughout so many different nations that they've just completely shaped the entire landscape of the world, and now people in the Western countries believe in them, like such as Vosh and Hassan, my two greatest ops. Okay, I'm gonna go. I'm the liberal. Okay, you guys are tanky cucks. And another problem with communism is that there is no room for a capitalistic party. Okay? Fundamentally, in order to seize all private property, you have to control everything. Freedom of speech does not exist, as people will likely just form capitalism one more time, basically. Okay? They'll form capitalism, they're going to start voting in capitalism, and actually Hassan said this when he was on a podcast with Ethan Klein. He said that well, our solution to that is they're going to need re-education. A re-education camp, Hassan? Really? A re-education camp? Fascinating. Huh. Very interesting belief you have right there. All the other commies are going to agree with that. Okay? So what's the problem with this? Isn't this the goal? Don't we want to make a utopia? We want the state to serve the people, right? We all own everything? Sounds good to me, I guess. We are no longer oppressed by the rich? Isn't this everything that the world wants? Well, no, not at all. Simon, I see you in my chat, boy. I was so right. It was like I'm just like such a genius that you don't even know. Okay? Communism applied. Here is the problem. When it's applied, it completely fails because it cannot address the concerns within the market. That's the problem. Okay? It can't tell what people want. Supply and demand. What is supply and demand? You guys know, okay? If you took Mr. Vallis's class, you know, okay? So the supply curve is how much supply is within a market. The demand curve is how much people want that product. And you compare it based on price and quantity, okay? So demand slopes downward because consumers want to buy the most for the least amount of price, which you can see on the graph, okay? And supply slopes upward because they want to sell the most for the highest price. And where these two lines intersect is called equilibrium, and that's where the free market allocates its resources. That's where prices should be in order to maximize profit. Okay? Okay, well, Simon is going to get the best lecture of his entire life right here. Okay? Ian, I hope you know this. Everybody in the call should know this. In the stream should know this, okay? Check out my Twitch if you haven't already, by the way. Okay. Communism, unfortunately, suffers from the same issue that monopolies do. It cannot tell what people want. So here is a monopoly graph, okay? It looks a lot different than our normal supply and demand graph, right? Like, clearly. Okay. So we have our price and quantity here still, correct? And then we have our marginal cost curve. So the initial one costs a lot to produce. Then it slopes downward as things become cheaper to produce, because that's just how diminishing marginal returns work. And then it slopes upward as the cost to produce the next unit keeps on going up, basically. Okay, and average total cost is fixed cost and variable cost combined, and then you take it over the average based on whichever means that you're at, okay? Here is our marginal revenue, and it slopes downward, and it also slopes below demand and price, because each time you increase the quantity sold, you have to lower the price, because it's the same principle that the more people competing in a market, the less the price is going to be, because there's more people competing, right? Okay, but the demand slopes downward here as well, and price slopes downward, but the difference is why marginal revenue isn't equal to price is because you have to lower the price each time you change the unit, meaning that they make less and less profit, right? And our marginal revenue is kind of like our profit, okay? Boom. Okay, but the problem with these market structures is they never produce at the socially optimal point, which is P equals MC. So when the price equals the marginal cost of the good, that's the socially optimal point. That's effectively equilibrium for a market, if you really want to think about it like that. Okay? But they always produce before that. They produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, because that's where they maximize profit. That is true of any firm. They always maximize profit where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And if there's one thing you want to take away, it's that. Okay? And the problem with that is that this market structure fundamentally is not socially optimal. And now I want you to take this market structure and apply it to an entire nation. Every single market is going to function like this. Okay? There will never be enough goods produced because Marxism doesn't know how many goods should be produced. They can't gauge all the factors of production. There is nobody else to compete with when you want to manufacture goods for your people. That's just the truth about communism. That's the truth. Okay? If there's one thing you gotta know, it's that. Next slide. Capitalism does not have this problem. The ownership of private property and the ability to create new means of production allows for competition between firms to address consumer supply and demand. Hence, capitalism wins. So this graph doesn't apply, right? Because there's so many different firms competing that there will never be any monopolies that exist. Well, of course you know that not to be true, because obviously there are monopolies that exist. And let's go into that. But first, this is the Marxist response to what I've said so far. What about big corporations? Don't monopolies and oligopolies suffer from the same issue? Yes, but I have two solutions. Solution A, busting up big business. Traditional capitalism calls for a load of competition within the free market. Hence, the initial economist who worked on capitalism said that monopolies and oligopolies should be broken up into smaller firms. This promotes competition and forces the market to produce at the socially optimal point. So here's another graph that you will learn about once you study economics. So this is the this graph is really shitty. Let me pull up another one. Sorry. YouTube video will cut this out. Don't worry. Okay. Boom. Okay, sorry, just spoiled it. Okay. Here is the beauty of the capitalistic structure. Okay? So on the left, we have the normal supply and demand graph, right? Okay? Price, quantity, supply and demand, equilibrium. On the right, this is of a market, an entire market. On the right, we have the perfect competition graph of an individual firm. So this is what one firm's individual graph looks like. So we see price, quantity. However, if you notice something different, price, demand, average revenue, and marginal revenue are all equal to each other. Unlike this graph over here, where they're not equal, and they're also sloping downward. But here, they're all equal and they're sloping straight across. Okay? Demand, price, average revenue, and marginal revenue are all equal here because no other firm can charge a higher amount. Perfect competition is it's so beautiful because there are so many firms competing that if one firm charges a higher price, you just go to a different firm. Okay? So the price and demand stay the exact same across every single fixed point. There is no change in this because there doesn't need to be. Okay? And then we have our marginal cost, which also does this like U shape again, as is typical of any market. And then we have, not every market, but most markets. And then we have our average variable cost and average total cost. Okay? And same thing applies here. Where does this firm maximize profit? Where MC equals MR. That's the entire equation you need to know. Okay? So it maximizes profit right here. And it just so happens that they break even at that point as well. Every perfectly competitive firm breaks even. They always do. In the long run, they always break even. Because all the opportunities for profit that exist within a perfectly competitive firm lead to more firms entering. So it shifts the P equals D equals AR equals MR curve. Not curve, the line. Basically, it shifts the line. Next slide. Okay. But here's another issue that faces markets, okay? So in the first example, you can break up these corporations and achieve what you want. When you break up the monopolies, you create the competition that you need in order to make a sustainable economic system. But there's another problem that arises. there's something called natural monopolies. And they tend to be an issue because the market structure operating as a monopoly is more efficient than it operating as anything else. Let's go over that. So here is a natural monopoly graph. Okay, you notice the same curves, right? MR is below the DARP curve, right, as you can see, just like the normal monopoly. But something is weird about the marginal cost and the average total cost, okay? So a natural monopoly, what makes it different than a normal monopoly is that it has a very high fixed cost. And a fixed cost are things like rent or things similar, not rent, I guess implementing a system, right? So here's an example. An example would be Consumers Energy. Okay, that's like the main energy company in Michigan. And they're a natural monopoly because their fixed cost, aka implementing all of the piping and all the wiring that goes to people's houses and stuff like that, is super expensive. So it makes no sense for multiple firms to compete in this structure. What makes more sense is one firm to supply everybody because it's easier to create that infrastructure, the high cost infrastructure. And the marginal cost curve is flat and straight because, for example, for Consumers Energy, it doesn't cost a whole lot to add somebody else back onto the line. Okay? What costs a lot is the initial structure. I'm giving it right now. I just said Consumers Energy, Ian. Consumers Energy is an example of a natural monopoly. Okay, because they have super high fixed costs, right? If you wanted to switch your carrier of like gas to your house, you would need to dig up all of your pipes. You need to implement new pipes. You need to you basically need to gut your entire house in order to make it work. And the problem with that is that it's super expensive. That's at least $100,000 job. Okay, but it has the same problem as a normal monopoly. What's the problem? They also produce where MR equals MC because that's where they make the most profit. So they're producing right here, right where my mouse is. Why is that an issue? Well, they're not producing where price equals MC, which is right here. And that's the socially optimal point. That's what society wants, but they do not have. Okay? And this triangle that forms is what's called deadweight loss. That's what society could have had, but we don't get. Okay? So, and their profit is this box right here. Oh, sorry, it's this box right here where it collides with the average total cost. Okay? But how do we fix this market, right? So breaking this market up doesn't really work because the market functions better as a monopoly, actually. It functions way better. Well, let's see. Price controls and welfare. So a price control would work really well here, actually. Normally, price controls are really bad for markets because price controls fundamentally stop firms from entering the market and changing it up. So, for example, rent control is a perfect example of a price control. Rent control is bad because it prevents other firms from entering the market. It prevents people from wanting to build new housing units, so they just don't build new housing units, okay? Because people enter markets in order to make profit. That's the only reason they enter markets, okay? But if there are 2 points where the government would implement a price control here. They would implement one right here, where the price equals the average total cost. That's where firms break even. So you still make economic profit, but you still make accounting profit, but you might not make economic profit here. So you break even right there. Or they put it right here at the socially optimal point, which is where they should put it. So you put it right here. Okay, let's say we got one right here. Okay, well, you see the issue with that is that their average total cost is above their break even, or not their socially optimal point. What's the problem with that? They're making a loss at that point. They actually lose money for operating. And that's where the government also steps in and says, hey, what's up, bud? We'll provide you with a subsidy to cover this loss. And the loss that they cover is equal to the distance between these 2 lines. Make sense? Should make sense. So, for example, that's why sometimes you see, like, big companies getting weird subsidies. Like, for example, I'm not sure if Consumers Energy is subsidized, but it likely is. It actually probably is, because there are so many price regulations on it that it likely produces here, and they actually need to be subsidized in order to correct the market. And another solution is welfare. let's say you don't want to bust up monopolies and oligopolies for whatever reason. Well, then you could start wealth transfers, which is the best solution if you don't want to do that. Isn't that socialistic, though? Well, unfortunately, not really. Sorry, commies. I get a W here, because wealth transfers are actually very capitalistic. Shut the fuck up. I'm not taking shit from any commies ever again. Fuck communism. Fuck Stalin, fuck Marx, fuck everybody. Okay, welfare is required when imperfect competition is rampant. Imperfect competition leads to wealth inequality, as less firms are able to compete for labor, lowering wages. What do I mean by this? So there's something called a monopsony. That's like a monopoly, but it's for labor. So it's only one firm hiring everybody in the town, for example. So like, you know those big oil towns where like there's like one oil refinery and that's where like everybody works. That would be an example of monopsony. So a monopoly kind of creates that, right? If you don't have many firms competing in the free market, naturally you're going to create an environment where workers can't switch jobs as easily. And that leads to a negative externality of wealth inequality because wages are kind of capped at a certain point and they won't extend beyond that. So you want to have rich competition within a market because it leads to wealth inequality being corrected. But if you don't correct it, the government needs to tax the wealthy and give it to the poor. That's what has to happen. Because the government's role is to correct negative externalities. A negative externality, for example, is wealth inequality. Okay, wealth inequality doesn't exist if you had true perfect competition in every single market. It only exists when imperfect competition exists. Okay, and you can see that with a Lorenz curve. I won't get into that too much right here, but just know, look it up on your own time. Important economic concept. So, and wealth inequality is concerned because if people can't afford things, right, it typically leads to an entire destabilization of markets and or a revolution, right? For example, before the French Revolution, everybody was starving. Everybody was starving. There was no ifs, ands, or buts around it. Everybody was starving. Okay, next slide. Oh, I believe this is my last slide, but let's talk about some other pros of capitalism over communism, okay? Capitalism is a W for other reasons, okay? It's very fast at responding to changes within a market, okay? Because the goal is profit. The goal is to extend your own material conditions. So when droughts happen in a market, people respond to that very quickly. People change their accordance super quickly. And communism can't do that. It's a command economy. It can't respond to what people want. Because it's only one corporation, effectively one corporation controlling everything. It doesn't know what people actually want. If there is one thing that you can push back against a freaking socialist about, is to say that communism in no way can properly allocate at an equilibrium point whatsoever. Okay? Capitalism also allows for class mobility. Now, while communism calls for classes to be dissolved and they just don't believe in hierarchy ever, hierarchy is fundamentally part of human nature, it seems to be like. Okay, hierarchies naturally form in the real world. So class mobility is going to be pretty fucking important. If capitalism is fundamentally a meritocracy, those with the most merit succeed. So class mobility is obviously an example of that. It also allows for innovation, right? So stagnation of markets will occur when there's only one firm competing. If there's multiple firms, your firm has to get the edge on the other dude. So that leads to innovation happening because, okay, if you can make your product better and more versatile to people, then you do that in response, right? You create a new technology in order to make your product, in order to make you be able to produce more units, you be able to produce more units at a lower cost or stuff like that in order to maximize profit for yourself, okay? And I think that concludes my monologue here. I hope you enjoyed watching the video. Please go check out my Twitch. I'm actually streaming that right now on my Twitch, okay, YouTube? Check it out. I love both websites. They're so fantastic. Go check that out. Watch my live stream if you want to be part of these videos and if you want to give any responses during the middle of my actual live segment, okay? And yup, another Pillin classic. This will be my mocking GIF. My GIF, sorry. I know I offended you, Ian. My mocking GIF right here.